Hello and welcome to episode 284 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. Welcome to the official, unofficial end of summer.
The official, unofficial end of summer. It is here. The weather is maybe changing slightly. We're definitely seeing signs of fall, but you wouldn't know it based on how high airfares are these days.
That's true. But according to all of the airlines in this particular hemisphere, summer is over and it's done. It's behind us. And it was amazing and successful. And all the flights were on time. None of the flights were canceled. Just ignore all the ones that were. And now it's winter.
Oh, great.
Cool.
I'm glad we cleared that up. Yeah, there was the rash of PR notices from at least US airlines today touting how well they did over the summer, whether or not they did all that well, but touting how well they did. So, yeah.
One of them came in from United touting, let's see, where did this email go? The United Airlines end of summer August operational stats. And they mention how 6 out of 7 of their hubs and I guess prime cities, they rank number 1 for on-time departures over the summer months. I have a feeling I know which one of their major hubs.
6 out of 7, you say?
Was a disaster and continues to be a disaster even after the unofficial official end of summer. For those who haven't pieced it together, that would be Newark. Is a continual disaster forever and always. Now aided by, I don't want to say incompetence on the FAA's part, but definitely an own goal on the FAA's part a couple times this week.
This has not gone well, is what we're saying. This transition of TRACON responsibility has just not gone well.
No, we didn't intend to talk about this.
No, but we've set ourselves down this path. Yeah.
We have. So we talked about this before, that the FAA moved all of the controllers for the Newark sector airspace down to Philadelphia, which is fine in theory, but in practice, their link to the radar data that they now are piping in remotely to Philly Center keeps breaking. And even if that breaks for 5 minutes, it screws up the entire day for Newark. And that affects every downstream flight for every flight that is trying to leave Newark, whether it's going to South Africa or Ithaca. The return flight is going to be delayed however long it takes for that airplane to get there. And there were a few times in the last week where Newark had upwards of 50 aircraft waiting to depart, and they were only pumping out an aircraft about every 2.5 minutes. So they had each one of the parallel taxiways to the departure runway, which I think was 4 left, lined up with aircraft in a way that, like, I hope all of the pilots on board those flights were like giving a round of applause as these aircraft between them slowly like throttled up and rolled down the runway and took off. Like I've just never seen anything like that. Let's hope they can figure it out because it has gone poorly.
So we bring up Newark because what we were going to talk about at the beginning of the show, and still are for just a second, and before we start recording, I'm trying to convince Jason to come out for Dorkfest next week in LA. And so I prodded him to look at some flights. And Newark is by far the cheapest option, we surmise, because no one wants to go there.
Yeah, fares are like half of what they are out of JFK, which doesn't historically bucked a trend because there are far, far, far more flights out of JFK to the West Coast. That out of Newark, you have United, which has the majority of flights. You have a couple of Spirit flights, and I think JetBlue is ending its flights, and also like a couple of token Alaska flights, and that's it. And usually it's far more expensive to fly to Newark, but now I guess people are wary of Newark and they don't want to book it. And I too am afraid of my flight exactly a month from today out of Newark. May have made a mistake on that one.
Well, I hope that all of these issues have been resolved or at least lessened by then. But if you are looking for something to do next weekend and you don't live near Newark and you live near an airport that seems to be working these days, I will be out in Los Angeles with Brett Schneider from Cranky Flyer, all the good folks from NYC Aviation, and whoever else shows up. It's always a fantastic time out in LA. We're going to do the raffle that we always do during Dorkfest. So between 11 and 1. We'll be out there eating cheeseburgers, looking at planes, and giving away things. Flight Radar 24 subscriptions, some t-shirts, and some other good stuff as well. So if you're looking for something to do next weekend, or if you're going to be there, just let us know. Email us at podcast@fr24.com. Love to meet up and see you. Unfortunately, it looks like because of Newark's dysfunction, Jason won't be joining us this year, and I'm a bit sad.
Yeah, sorry. I made it last year. Not going to make it this year. I'll be riding some trains here in New York, which is super interesting to a very select group of people. No LA for me this year.
I guarantee that there's some audience crossover between train
undoubtedly
podcast listeners and aviation podcast listeners, for sure.
Yeah, not the topic of this podcast, but I'll be missing it. When I wanted to book ahead of time, it was just too damn expensive. But now it's not, and it's too late for me to book it because I've got other plans.
Okay, let's move on to this week's news. And we start in Hong Kong. A Cathay Pacific A350 on its way to Zurich returned to Hong Kong after something broke. And they held for a while. They dumped fuel and they landed back in Hong Kong safely. And they said, there's something wrong with the engine. And then they took the engine apart and found that one of the fuel lines inside one of the Trent XWB 97 engines was broken. So Cathay said to themselves, hey, let's see, because all of these aircraft have the same component, let's see if any of our 47 other A350s are affected. And it turns out that fuel lines in 15 of its 48 A350s, spanning the A350-900 and the A350-1000, are in fact affected. They technically grounded the fleet, though I think this was one of those things where they landed, they looked at them. If it needed to be fixed, they've taken it out of service. They've canceled a few dozen flights through today, Wednesday, September 4th, and there are another dozen or so flights scheduled to be canceled through the 11th of September. So far, 6 of the 15 have been put back into service, and 9 will be back in service by the 7th. Sorry, another 11 flights through September 7th. I had it backwards initially. So good to know that these things are easy to fix and being put back into service. And Reuters is now reporting that both Airbus and Rolls don't seem to be seeing this as a fleet-wide issue, though we don't know why that is yet.
No, we do know that apparently JAL had been inspecting its fleet as well, but we haven't seen any widespread cancellations or grounding of its aircraft, and no other airline operating the A350 has had any sort of widespread issue. So we will have to wait and see if this was an installation error by either Airbus or Rolls-Royce, or if this was some mishap that happened during routine maintenance and inspection specifically to the Singapore Airlines aircraft. But thankfully, this does not seem to be a widespread issue that will see the entire world's A350 fleet grounded. I would be pretty shocked by that, since there are a lot of them out there that have certainly gone through some pretty heavy checks since introduction.
Yes.
Thankfully, this seems like just an isolated, very quick thing. Not quite as quick as United grounding its 321neo fleet because of a no smoking sign.
A lighted placard, but no.
But still a pretty quick grounding nonetheless.
Yeah, so good to see that this seems to be easily understood and easily fixed. Russian investigators have released their preliminary report on the Gazpromavia SuperJet that crashed back in July. And the preliminary report is in-depth in its scope.
Lengthy.
And very lengthy, an 88-page preliminary report dealing with a lot of the flight data recorder data and a thorough timeline of what happened and how it happened. And as Jason and I were reading through the report, which is only available in Russian, so we were using machine translated text here. So hopefully getting the gist of it. But I think we've we've understood the rough outline of what's happened here. And it's not dissimilar to the two 737 MAX MCAS-induced crashes.
Now, you can hear Ian is very carefully choosing his words, as we don't want to make any comparisons that may not be true. But at first glance, reading this report, or reading the translation of the report, and looking at the photography and everything, it is very similar to the outcome of MCAS, which caused the crash of two 737 MAXs. But what's interesting, most interesting to me, I think, is that the SSJ, the Sukhoi SuperJet 100, was flying for 8 years before the MAX had its first flight. So this isn't a case, as some people have said, as, oh, the Russians copied MCAS. No, it's still not the case where it's the other way around, but the SuperJet is actually quite a bit older than the MAX. Its first flight was May 19th, 2008, not introduced with an airline until 2011, when I believe the MAX had its introduction with an airline in 2016. So the SuperJet is actually an older aircraft than the MAX. I don't know if most people know that, but Ian, what did we learn from the translation of this very thorough report? What did its MCAS style system do?
So this is, I should say, it's the result. And Jason, you brought this up before we started recording, which I think was a really good point. The function of the crash was not similar to MCAS. The result certainly was. And what we learned from reading the report is that this all starts. So the beginning and the end, I should say, are very similar to the Ethiopian Flight 302 crash, where the angle of attack sensor is providing bad information to the air data computers. And because of that, the aircraft does things that it shouldn't do. And that's the broad outlines. The angle of attack sensors here from the preliminary report, what we're learning, were installed incorrectly. And because of that, there was a deviation between the true angle of attack for the aircraft and the angle of attack being reported to the computers by those particular sensors. So there were 2 of 4 sensors that were replaced on this particular aircraft during the heavy maintenance. And remember, the aircraft crashed on its first flight post heavy maintenance. And so what happened is that the angle of attack sensors were telling the aircraft's computers that the angle of attack was much, much higher than it was in truth. And what that did for the computers was tell the computer system that is part of protecting the aircraft that it needed to trim the elevator down so that the nose would go down and not stall the aircraft. What that had the effect of doing was forcing the nose down and leading, partially, if we're reading the preliminary report correctly, partially because of an overspeed, including an overspeed of the aircraft, because the auto throttle was disengaged and the throttles were set nearly full because of the combination of the elevator pitching the nose down and the speed increasing. That pitch down became unrecoverable by the pilots, even though they were pulling back full on the side stick.
So in this case, we had a computer system basically nullifying the inputs of the fly-by-wire side sticks that the pilots were telling the aircraft to do, and the aircraft's computer was saying, no, I'm not going to do that. That will put us in an unsafe condition. Whereas MCAS was a very different situation, where it was a very mechanical situation where the aircraft knew, oh no, the one angle of attack sensor I'm relying on says we're in a dangerous system. I'm going to mechanically spin the trim and push the nose down. Whereas the flight crew in that case just had to turn off that electronic system. In this case with the SSJ, apparently this had happened previously, just days before the fatal accident, where there was maintenance done angle of attack sensors were replaced, and the same issue had occurred. But in this case, the flight crew had switched to a backup flight data computer or flight computer system, and it was getting the correct information, and it was able to, the flight crew was able to stabilize the flight, and they were fine. Unfortunately, in this case, the flight crew did apparently, it's hard to tell from the translated report, but in this case, they did not switch over to the backup computer. We don't actually know if that would have had the intended outcome of saving the flight, but it is a very different situation, but very similar situation from MCAS, where this is a computer system doing computer things to override the flight crew or prevent the flight crew from making inputs, whereas MCAS was a much more mechanical situation, I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah. And there was a lot going on kind of crossways between the angle of attack sensors, the pilot side stick inputs, and the position of the throttle. Because of the overspeed, the computer was also saying, I need to slow this plane down. And to do that, it tosses up the spoilers. But because it tossed up the spoilers, pulling back on the side stick, the aircraft loses lift. So the aircraft was actually able to climb again when they started pulling back on the side stick, and they were able to arrest that climb. But the aircraft stopped the climb and began to descend again after the overspeed spoiler protection. Then, because the aircraft pitched up and increased its angle of attack, the angle of attack protection function came back again. And so even though the crew is doing its best to climb, the aircraft is saying, no, I think that I am going to stall and I need to put my nose down.
Yeah, pretty remarkable. There's a lot of similarity, but a lot of difference to the MAX crashes and MCAS. It's a lot to take away from this situation.
Yeah, I think that this goes through, and this isn't to say, I don't want people to go, oh, the Russian, no, this was an aircraft that was designed for an international audience and operated by multiple operators outside of Russia for quite some time.
Into U.S. airspace, Interjet.
Into U.S. airspace, yes.
Before Interjet ceased to exist, flew it, I think, to San Antonio, at least in the U.S., maybe Miami. CityJet operated it on behalf of some airlines in Europe as well. I think Brussels Airlines even it operated on behalf of. They had high hopes for this aircraft, and thankfully it took a very long time for the very exact and unlikely and strange combination of events to occur, and to occur in a deadly way. Very delayed after introduction to service, as opposed to the MAX, where it was not immediate, but very close to the introduction to service of that aircraft. Here, this took over a decade, well over a decade and a half before it ended up becoming, I guess, a known issue with this aircraft. Now it doesn't matter as much for the rest of the world, since the SSJ really isn't going to be operating anywhere outside of Russia or Russia's allies, I guess. But yeah, very unfortunate chain of events leading to this crash.
Yeah. This is just the preliminary report. So we await the final report to see what else we learn. The final note on this is there's a picture of the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder included in the preliminary report. And if you had any doubts about the forces that those recorders can withstand, I suggest looking at those pictures.
And if you had any doubts about the resiliency of modern electronics, you might want to take a look at what the NAND flash chips on the data recorder look like and realize that they were able to pull the data off these things. It's absolutely remarkable to see the images of the damage presented right next to the data from the damaged chips in those pictures. It's pretty incredible. And I guess I want to applaud the Russian authorities here for putting out a really, really immensely detailed, thorough, and quick preliminary report, because I know we've seen some preliminary reports in the past that said, this thing happened, we'll issue a final report eventually. And I don't want to point any fingers at China and the China Eastern crash. I think that was in 2020, but this was pretty comprehensive, I'd say.
Yes, absolutely. We'll put a link to the report in the show notes, and we'll see if we can get a official English translation somewhere. But usually that waits for the final report, if it comes at all. This next story was sent in by multiple people, including a few pilots who were rather upset to learn about this. And we've discussed it a bit at Flight Radar 24. Obviously, our developers know a bit more about the mechanics of this, but they wanted to learn more about what known crew member was. Because remember, we're based in Sweden, and they were wondering what known crew member was. So it turns out a few researchers discovered a vulnerability in the known crew member system, which is, as well as the cockpit access security system, which allows known crew. I mean, it's a well-named program. People who are crew members
and they're known
are part of this program, who are known, become part of this program and allow those people to bypass security. Or not bypass security, but go through a special lane. And they discovered a vulnerability in how the database works, basically allowing them to add anyone they want to the list. And I'm very, very, very much oversimplifying this here. And also modify existing known crew members. So there are a variety of ways that someone with malicious intent could use this vulnerability. Thankfully, the people who discovered it are not malicious in their intent, did report it to the Department of Homeland Security, which says it has since resolved the vulnerability. However, the TSA, in its infinite wisdom, instead of saying thank you, was kind of a jerk about it.
Hey, you'd never want to be a jerk to white hat hackers. They're your friends. They're the good guys. You don't punish them.
So they responded with an incorrect statement on the vulnerability. And then when they were called out on that front, they backtracked and basically deleted the things from their website that made them wrong.
Oh, okay.
But thankfully, the vulnerability has been addressed. You cannot, in fact, add yourself to the known crew member list and fly without going through security. So that's good news.
Yeah, sure.
We talked about Brussels wanting to ban a variety of aircraft from flying to the airport generally. And then we also talked about a more recent move, which wanted to see the 777 freighter banned from flying to Brussels. And that just didn't make any sense.
That didn't make any sense at all.
And enough people said, hey, that doesn't make any sense, that they've backtracked on this. Flight Global has some interesting reporting that goes deep into, and I think I've said this on the program before, but one of the truisms is that all politics is local. And as it turns out, part of this was the minister who made the decision lost his election and was trying to stick it to the opposition party, and before he was out of office. And I like that level of petty is involved
Chicago
in
style.
Major decisions. Yeah, as a Chicagoan, I appreciate that. This particular minister's response was, no, this is all about environment and noise issues and things like that. But it doesn't sound like the 777 is going to be banned from Brussels anytime soon.
Yeah, especially since the article states that because of that move, if they were to ban the 777F, it would just be replaced by smaller, older, and noisier aircraft, which I assume would be the 767. I think DHL has a bunch of those in its fleet. That would be a weird thing to do, not quite as a sensical move that I think their neighbor to the north in Amsterdam, they banned a whole bunch of aircraft. We probably talked about that about a year ago. But those were old aircraft.
That was a great list.
That was a great list because it involved things like the 707.
Yeah. I think it actually banned the Comet.
It banned the Concorde. The Concorde's never going to fly to Amsterdam ever again. But that was a list of banning older aircraft. This was banning one of the most modern freighters out there, while not banning the older stuff that would have to forcibly replace it. Kind of reminds me also of what I think Tel Aviv tried to do by banning the 747 outright when there was no clear replacement.
Yeah.
Fun. I love when politics get involved in aviation and has no idea what they're doing.
None of it makes any sense. I absolutely love it.
The best kind of politics.
The best kind of politics. I don't know if this particular story is necessarily political, but it's one of those where I think we all saw it coming, which is a major airline comes up with a catchy, fun, branded, low-cost subsidiary. They paint a couple of planes, they send them out into the world, and it does not work.
I don't know if this is any of that, because OTT Airlines is not fun. It's not different. It's not anything like a TED or a song or a whatever. This is OTT Airlines, the offshoot of China Eastern Airlines that operated exclusively, I believe, commercially, the Comac ARJ21. It is now being folded into China Eastern proper after being founded in February 2020. Great timing, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So now China Eastern proper will operate the ARJ21. I think, I don't know if we'll ever know this for sure, but OTT Airlines almost certainly existed exclusively to operate the ARJ21, so it didn't have to be a part of the China Eastern fleet. And I feel like maybe they're being told, hey, you need to operate this in your actual airline, not this other thing.
Oh, I appreciate that. Okay, so it is political, is what we're saying.
Yeah, probably. They'll look good next to the C919s, sure.
Yeah, there you go.
Why not? A happy family. Happy Chinese family.
Perfect. Speaking of happy families, as of September 1st, SAS has officially joined SkyTeam, the airline which was a founding member of Star Alliance, is now a member of SkyTeam. And good for them. They're continuing, I should say, emergence from bankruptcy and a restructuring process, and making big changes alongside of their Air France KLM investment. All of this makes sense. Still a little salty, and judging by Jason's sigh there, I think he probably is too. But on the bright side, you can now fly from the northernmost regularly served commercial airport to the southernmost regularly served commercial airport on the same alliance.
That's great. I look forward to cashing in 5.2 million Sky Miles for the ability to do that. That's where the bitterness comes in.
We should do an episode on just how awful airline frequent flyer programs are.
Some of them more awful than others.
They're really awful.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it.
Okay, maybe we shouldn't.
It makes me sad that I have so many miles with Delta, and they are virtually worthless.
Virtually, Jason, virtually. A place you could use your miles, I suppose, is Virgin Atlantic. And they're going back to Ghana and to Saudi Arabia for the first time. So this is new routes coming out of Virgin Atlantic, coming out of London, making up for the fact that they need a place to send their planes now that they're no longer flying to China. So they've got new planes coming into the fleet. They've got routes that they're ending, and they're going to go make money in Africa and Saudi Arabia.
Okay. Wasn't there an offshoot of Virgin at some point, like Virgin Nigeria? Wasn't that a thing at some point?
Was it?
I feel like it was. I mean, we can probably look this up, but Virgin Nigeria. I don't know. I feel like it was a thing.
Air Nigeria was a 50-50 joint venture.
Yeah, they had a logo and everything. Virgin Nigeria. Okay, it was a thing.
Yeah.
It was a real thing. A long time ago, by the way.
Yeah, this was not recent history. They ceased operations in 2012. So there you go. Hey, fact checking on the fly. Good for us. Let's go to India, where Vistara is going to become Air India on the 11th of November. Beginning on the 12th of November, tickets will no longer be bookable on some Vistara flights, and that will phase out over time as Vistara gets folded into Air India proper. Air India proceeding apace with its revitalization. They, over the weekend, last weekend, conducted their first A350 service to London, so beginning long-haul service. 2 out of 3 services to London from Delhi will be operated by the new A350s. So good for them, and looking forward to seeing the continued changeover.
Yeah, a lot of people will be sad to see Vistara go, but if Air India keeps doing what it has been doing and bucking a lot of the expectations of, oh, this will be a disaster, maybe it won't be a disaster. Everything so far has seemed to go pretty well.
Yeah.
Maybe we're still in the honeymoon phase of they're taking delivery of new aircraft. What could possibly go wrong? But integrating another airline like Vistara, that is no small feat. So good luck if you happen to be flying what was a Vistara route on November 11th. It could be fun. It could also be completely ordinary.
Let's hope for the latter. Today, we learned that Wizz Air will put its first A321 XLR on the Milan Abu Dhabi route, which will make it the longest route in the Wizz Air network. Average flight time currently, because the route's currently operated by Etihad, the flight time is roughly 6 hours, little under 6 hours. So it will take you longer to get there on Wizz Air's A321 XLR. But as part of the PR today, Wizz Air says that tickets will be 70% cheaper than Etihad's.
I mean, it'll be a lot cheaper, but also it is a very different experience being on a Wizz Air aircraft for upwards of 7 hours as opposed to an Etihad whatever aircraft for about 6 hours. I guess it's individual priorities. If comfort and a free meal and entertainment and Wi-Fi and legroom and I don't know, all the other things with a full service airline mean anything to you, you'll probably want to stick with Etihad. But if you want to go on the cheap, hey, now you got an option too.
There you go. Over the weekend, actually this happened on Monday, which is still technically our weekend because we were off on Monday.
It's a 3-day weekend.
It was a 3-day weekend. It wasn't a weekend for the folks who were busy repossessing Nicolas Maduro's Falcon 900.
All right, then. Well, apparently, the quote from the Justice Department was this morning, the Justice Department seized an aircraft we allege was illegally purchased for $13 million through a shell company and smuggled out of the United States for Nicolas Maduro and his cronies. That's an actual quote from Attorney General Merrick Garland, which I just love. Anytime you can somehow work the word cronies into an official U.S. government quote, that's pretty amazing. But the reg of the aircraft is a bit different. It is T7 ESPRT. That's a long registration.
Yeah, it's got spirit.
It's got spirit, but now it's got a lot of red tape, let's say. I don't think it's going to be going anywhere for a while.
No, I mean, if the same thing happens to that Falcon that happened to the 747 that they seized, it's going to get chopped up.
Oh, that's too bad.
That is too bad.
It's a nice looking aircraft. I can't even find any information on how old it is because every time I look up the registration, it just goes to articles about the aircraft. But yeah, I'll take it.
Sure, why not?
Send it to Newark.
You'll never see it again.
No, too bad.
Okay, in good news to close the show. Jason, do you remember when we first started talking about the LAN and TAM merger?
No, I'm pretty sure that predates the podcast.
It predates the podcast. So in 2012, LAN completed the takeover of TAM and became LATAM, which I think on a very early episode of the podcast, and I apologize if this is not true, but I really want it to be because it's kind of amusing to me and I'm going to get a chuckle out of it. You had the on-air realization that the combination of LATAM is both a combination of LAN and TAM and is an abbreviation for Latin America.
That doesn't ring a bell.
Okay.
I can't tell you you're wrong because that would have been like 7 years ago.
So for a while, they operated as independent airlines. Then, a few years after that, they merged the operations and the branding of the airline to become LATAM. Now, I think, 8 years after that happened, they've finally finished painting the LAN fleet into LATAM livery.
I mean, sure. If you're not in a hurry to repaint the aircraft, it takes about they take about 8 years between paint cycles. So I guess that about checks out, doesn't it?
Yeah, they just weren't in a hurry. That's for sure.
Yeah, they were not in a hurry. But I'm looking back to see if I can find any of this, and I'm looking through our show notes. And apparently, in episode 136, Azul at some point wanted to buy all of LATAM. All of LATAM. Wow, that would have been interesting. At some point in the past, Delta bought some A350s from LATAM after buying 20% of LATAM. LATAM's got a lot of things going on, but I don't ever recall that moment you're talking about.
I wanted it to be true.
Maybe it is.
Maybe it is. I don't know. If you remember that episode, email us at podcast@fr24.com. And I'm going to think it's true anyway, regardless of what evidence to the contrary is found.
That's fine.
Yeah. This has been episode 284 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.